The show is brought to you by the Canadian Brew House, where Wing Wednesdays are unbeatable. At Canadian Brew House, only 69 cents each, and a mountain of flavors to savor, and a flavor of the month. Do that wing thing every Wednesday at the Canadian Brew House. It's Chris Mazurkin for Barney Shinkruk. He'll be back in tomorrow. Thanks for being part of the show. If you've missed anything in hour one or hour two, you can always catch up on the podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, or you can just go to sportscage.com, where everything is neat and tidy. And you can also read about all the teams competing for the Montana's Brier and the Scotties Tournament of Hearts. And you can get signed up for the daily newsletter right there at sportscage.com. It has been an incredibly busy 48 hours in the Western Hockey League, and trades galore. And so we wanted to bring on Dante De Caria, who's the voice of the Regina Pats, to not only get the Pats perspective, but a little bit of the Western Hockey League perspective. So Dante, we're going to take our Pats hat off for a sec. We're just going to be fans of the Western Hockey League from about 10,000 feet watching from above. I had said this earlier. It's like all the teams are sitting at a blackjack table in the casino, and everybody is deciding to push their chips into the middle because they think that they have their guy or their guys that are going to get them over the top. The big trade earlier today, and we'll get to the Pats trade in just a sec. Andrew Cristall from the Kelowna Rockets going to the Spokane Chiefs for a player and 5 draft picks. Did you know this one was coming down? A lot of people thought he might be traded. Did you know this one was coming down the pipe? And does the return that Kelowna got back surprise you at all?
No, it doesn't, to be quite honest with you, and thanks again for having me on. Really excited to talk about the Pats and the WHL, because this time of year is so fun. Every time I get a notification on my phone, in fact, I have the WHL Twitter notifications turned on. I see trade, and I just go click on it. I go, holy smokes, look at this, and holy smokes, look at that. I had an idea that Andrew Cristall would be moved because the Kelowna Rockets are currently not in a playoff spot right now, and they are hosting the Memorial Cup next year. And so they had to make a move that can help their team for next season. Now, they do get a 2007-born player that will be 18 next year. I was thinking that they were going to try to get maybe a high-end 06 or an 06 that could be good next year, but they decided not to go down that route and decided to go get draft capital, which they're probably going to have to use this summer to acquire some players to help bolster their team for next season, because they have Tijay Ginla coming back. They have Hiroki Goisick, who's going to be 19 next year. He's a draft pick of the Nashville Predators. But outside of that, they need a lot of help up front and on the back end as well. They don't have any big-time players like, say, Cristall and Price, who they ended up moving this year close to the deadline. So not surprised that Andrew Cristall was moved. Not shocked that the Spokane Chiefs would make that move, because next season is Berkeley Cadden's last year, and they're probably going to end up having to move him next season if they don't end up making another run. And since they didn't win the bid for next year's Memorial Cup, they essentially said, okay, the West is wide open. Let's go for it this year, because some of the teams out West haven't necessarily played as good as maybe we would have thought. So to answer your first question, not surprised that Cristall was moved. Obviously, the return may be a little bit less than what people would have thought, but I think Kelowna wanted to get a boatload of draft picks so that they can pick out some big-time names next year.
Well, one of the things Colson and I were talking earlier about was the division and staying in the division. And obviously, it's whatever's going to give you the best return. The trade that made me scratch my head, because currently Medicine Hat, Saskatoon, and Calgary are all fighting for first place. The Blades trading Tanner Molendijk to the Tigers for 2 17-year-olds, Erasny and Kachowski, and 5 draft picks. Did that one make you scratch your head a little bit too, considering that the Blades are fighting for first place?
No, it didn't. It didn't surprise me at all. I've obviously got a pretty good idea on where Saskatoon stands with their draft picks. And next year, they didn't have a single draft pick until the 7th round. And this year, their highest draft pick was in the 4th round. So they had to make some moves. It's not sustainable. Like, you need draft picks in order to build teams, and that's why they had to make that move. Now, they were kind of caught in the middle because they still want to compete this season. They're going to make the playoffs no matter what. I think the East is set. I think that Red Deer is not going to make it. They're sitting in 9th, and essentially all the teams from 8 to 1 are going to make the playoffs. Saskatoon knows, with all the teams around the Eastern Conference making moves, that they don't have the assets in terms of their draft capital to make moves to help their team this year. So they had to sell off because essentially they look around at Lethbridge, Calgary, et cetera, Medicine Hat, and see, okay, those teams are going for it this season. We don't have a chance to go for it. We're going to make the playoffs now, no matter what. Maybe we can win a round or two, and we'll go from there. So they had to make these moves in order to prepare for the next couple of years because, unfortunately, they're going to be rough years for Blades fans. They had to move Tanner Molendyk. I like what they got in the 2007-born players in that trade for Molendyk. They obviously get some draft capital as well, which is important. But Hayden Harsani, he's a former first-round pick in the league. I know he's been injured over the course of the season, but I think he has a lot of high potential. Jack Kachkowski is a really good defender. He's obviously pretty raw, but he could definitely bring a lot to their back end in years to come. So this had to make, and if he didn't make it, then they would be paying the price for years to come.
Well, I think with the Blades this year, they're playing with house money. They're tied for first place, but I don't think anybody expected them to be in first place because everybody thought after going for it last year, this would be a bit of a down year. So take what you can get. And I think if they do kind of fade as everybody else is loading up, like the Hurricanes, and you had mentioned the Hitmen, that's how it plays out. At the time, you probably easily could have said this. I don't think anybody expected the Calgary Hitmen to be this good, but I also don't think that obviously many Hitmen fans, or maybe the Hitmen, realized what a good player they were getting in Tanner Howe, because this Calgary Hitmen hockey team, ever since he showed up, has gone from nowhere to a contender. They're really good. Are you surprised or not surprised in the player they got in Tanner Howe and just what he has brought to that squad, just being that one guy?
Well, Chris, he's not even their best player, right? I mean, you look at Cutter Yakinchuk, who is now injured, so obviously they're going to be missing him, but they also have Sora Minio, who they got for 2 first-round picks from the Seattle Thunderbirds. He was one of the top defensemen on Canada's World Junior team, and they have Ben Kindle and Oliver Tulk, who are on a 20 and 17-game point streak right now. So Tanner Howe's not necessarily going to be a top scorer on that team, but he's going to have to play a role that they need, and that's somebody who can penalty kill, he can play in front of the net, he can cause havoc. But yes, they're getting a really good player. They had to pay a big price. Reese Hamilton's obviously a highly touted defenseman who's going to go probably in the second or third round in this year's NHL draft. But in order to get something, you have to pay up, and they did that in trading Reese Hamilton to the Pats to get Tanner Howe. But this team is just so good because they can beat you in so many different ways. They picked up a really strong goaltender in Daniel Hauser, who in fact with over 100 wins in his WHL career is actually 17th in WHL history in wins. This was a guy who began his career, I think it was like his first 20 starts in the WHL with the Winnipeg Ice, didn't record a single loss. Like, he's as consistent as they get. Obviously, Wenatchee pays a big price to move him. They're in a playoff spot right now, but they're kind of in a retooling phase as well. So Calgary's very good from the net to the back end to their forwards to their bottom six. And they've added some nice depth players as of late. They've been able to pick up some really good defensemen. And in net, they're very strong as well.
So the one thing about the Blades and the Tigers and the Hitmen, and I'd mentioned this earlier in the show when Colson and I were chatting about it, they're playing just good team hockey. Like, they've come together as a team where I look at Lethbridge, someone, and I know that they're in third or fourth or whatever, but they're not necessarily great, and they're loading up on these players, and then they pick up, in the big trade the other day, they pick up Caden Price, 19-year-old Sasky guy. He's going to do a lot of things. Are they just trying to stockpile the talent and hope that it comes together as a team? Because that doesn't necessarily always work. Just trying to put the best players on the roster without the chemistry.
You know what? It's funny you mentioned that because actually Moose Jaw and Swift Current were kind of in a similar situation last year where they were a good team, but they weren't necessarily a great team as far as their records show. And in fact, Swift Current and Moose Jaw were actually in the middle of the Eastern Conference standing at this time last year prior to making some big trades in which we saw Connor Geekie play for the Broncos and Matthew Savoy head to Moose Jaw, and we know where the Moose Jaw Warriors ended up. I think they finished with just 5 losses in the second half of the season. Same with the Broncos. Like, that really propelled their team in the second half of the season. You also have to remember, this is a Lethbridge Hurricanes team that has been without 2 of their top players. One player who was playing for the Swiss national team at the World Juniors in Leo Brayar, and of course Braden Yager, who was representing Team Canada at the World Juniors as well. Miguel Marcus has been injured, and he's expected to be back in the next couple of weeks. He's a Nashville Predators third-round pick, so they haven't necessarily played with a healthy team just yet. I think they've underperformed in net, but defensively, this team is very good, like very strong. They've got some good 20-year-olds on their team as well. Braden Edwards is in his last year. This is a former 30-plus goal scorer last year. I think this is the Lethbridge Hurricanes team that really can fight for a WHL championship this year. And I wouldn't be surprised if they're able to win a WHL championship. The only thing that's hindering them, Maz, is the fact that they actually haven't won a playoff game in the last 4 playoff series that they've actually been in. And this is the second time that they've put all their chips to the middle and gone for it. That's right. They've been swept in the last 4 playoff series that they've currently been in. Last year they were swept against Moose Jaw. They were swept the year before, and they were swept the year before that against the Edmonton Oil Kings. And then obviously prior to were swept in the first round of the playoffs as well. So this is a team that is seriously dying, not only for a series win, but for a playoff win.
Well, and the other thing too is in junior hockey, like if you don't, after pushing your chips in with all that you have to give up, and draft capital is the term that gets used all the time, it hurts even more. It's one thing if everybody's on a pro contract or whatever, and that's fine. But when the experiment doesn't work, that stings even more. So I'm sure that Peter Anholt, obviously he's looking for a better spring than, let's say, his new year started out from there. Flurry of activity today. The Regina Pats, Taylor Tabashniak, I believe that's how we pronounce it. The Pats pick up a goalie from Red Deer for a 2026 7th-round pick. What are we getting back from the Rebels?
I mean, this is a guy who hasn't played a WHL game just yet. He's somebody who was the U18 goaltender of the year in the Sask U18 league. So I've never seen him play, Maz, so I'm going to try to provide a good scouting report for you. I didn't have a chance to chat with our goaltending coach or any of the coaches. I'm not surprised that the Pats made this move because he was essentially the only 2007-born goaltender that was out there, at least from my knowledge, right? I know Red Deer decided not to bring him up as a backup this season. And from what I understand, they were actively moving him over the course of the season because he had not been given that opportunity with the big club. And so he was playing right now with the Regina Pack Canadians. You can watch them at the Cooperators Center. Again, as I mentioned, Sask U18 goaltender of the year. I don't know if he will join the Pats. From what I understand, he will continue to play for the Regina Pack Canadians, who are second place in the Saskatchewan U18 AAA League. So, hey, he's looking to finish off the season pretty strong, and hopefully he gets called up to the Regina Pats and we see what we got. But hard for me to say what the Pats are getting. I haven't seen him play just yet. I know he's got some size. He trains the right way. I would assume that they've scouted him. Dale Durkach, Max Paddock have looked at him. So obviously they did their homework on him, and it's a pretty, it's not a big price. So why not make this move, right?
4 games in the Western Hockey League tonight. You've got the night off. Well, unless you're going to be watching the Wednesday night in the dub game of the week. Moose Jaw will be in Calgary to take on those Hitmen. I don't like the Warriors' chances. It may not be ready. Saskatoon's in Edmonton, PA's in Medicine Hat, and Vancouver's in Prince George. Pats are back in action on Friday night. They'll be in Moose Jaw to play the Warriors. Pre-game show, 6:20 CKRM will start at 6:30. Face-off goes at 7 o'clock. The Warriors and the Pats, let's just say it hasn't been the best of seasons. I think we can say, what are a couple of the things, like some of the shining stars, or some of the things that you're seeing this year that are like, okay, some of the seeds are planted for next season and the seasons to come?
Well, I think all the 2007-born players that Alan Miller has been able to accumulate over the course of the season, with the newest player being Ashton Brown, who I haven't even had a chance to meet just yet. You know what I mean? Yeah, I like Zach Pantelakis, Jace Eglin, Reese Hamilton, Matt Peranich, Julian Mays. I apologize if I'm missing out on any of them. There's so many, right? I think these players, as they're 18 next year, will have an opportunity to really contribute in the WHL. It's hard to ask of a lot of production from 17-year-old players. So I think the chips have been put in place, or the pieces have been put in place, so to speak. I like the youth movement. I like where this team is heading. It's nice to see them get a young goalie that can maybe grow with this 2007 group. But as Alan Miller has said in countless interviews that I've either done with him or I've heard him do, you can't trade your way out of a rebuild. The Pats need to build from the ground up. And they really had no choice but to try to get some younger players. You can't trade for 16-year-olds in the WHL, so there's really the only young players that you can trade for are 17-year-olds, right? You can trade for 18 and 19-year-olds whenever you want, same with 20-year-olds, but there's no point for the Pats to trade for 2006 foreign players, so you might as well try to trade for the youngest group possible, and they did that. and we'll see what they do. I mean, this is a great opportunity after the deadline for this team to feel comfortable, for these younger players to understand, okay, there's no more trades, there's no more roster movement. This is the team that we have, and let's just go play hockey.
Probably seen this because you're around the club. Once that trade deadline passes, how much more relaxed, or like I said, the 16-year-olds are off the table, but everybody else could be in play. How much more relaxed is everybody after that Western Hockey League trade deadline passes, knowing that, okay, this is my team. I know where I'm going to be to finish out the season?
It actually makes me a little bit more relaxed because I don't have to write as many press releases as I've done over the course of the season, no more trade graphics or anything like that. You mentioned hopefully I have the night off. I'm begging, tomorrow's the trade deadline, that I have the night off and that I don't get a call from Alan Miller tonight. We've made another 3 trades. I'm just joking. There's only one more day left. Happy to write any trade releases that I can. But yeah, I think everybody feels a lot more relaxed. The coaches, myself, the front office, the general manager, the assistant general manager, the trainers, the fans. I think everybody's all in the same boat. And see who's being moved next. They can kind of get to know this group that is going to grow together. And for the older players, they can kind of just focus on being leaders and, providing a solid example on some of these younger players. I like the character players that they've been able to bring in the last, couple of months or so. Caden Brown's been a really nice addition on.
Oh, did we lose Dante? It's one thing to lose somebody on video. It's another thing to lose somebody on.
Yeah, we'll call him back
phone.
here.
All right.
Give us a sec.
We'll get him back on the line. Okay, we're chatting with Dante De Caria, voice of the Regina Pats. The Pats are off Friday night in Moose Jaw to take on the Warriors. That rivalry will continue. Man, some of those games over the years. We'll have the pregame show on 620 CKRM Friday night starting at 6:30. Face-off will go at 7 o'clock. There is 4 games in the Western Hockey League tonight. The Warriors are in action. They will be in Calgary to take on the Headmen. If you want to watch the game, it's the Wednesday night in the dub game. If you go to WHL.ca, you can just click on the link for free and watch the game there. They do a game of the week every Wednesday night. Saskatoon's at Edmonton, PA is at Medicine Hat, and Vancouver is in Prince George to play the Cougars. And Dante mentioned earlier, if you want to see goalie Taylor Tabashnik in action, probably getting the start tonight. Regina Pat Canadians taking on Estevan to play the Great North Bears. That's going to be an 8 o'clock face-off at Affinity Place. All right. If we don't have Dante, we'll take a break. And when we come back, we got him? We got him.
I'm back.
All right. Well, it's funny. Maybe he had to pick up another call or on the other line because there was a breaking trade coming through, and he would have to get started on the press release. Dante De Caria is back. Okay, so just a couple of questions. I just want your thoughts. We're from 10,000 feet again. In the West, no one's catching Everett. They're running away with it. They've got 61 points in 38 games. In the East, because we'd mentioned this logjam between Medicine Hat, Saskatoon, and Calgary, all kind of tied for first place. As it settles out for the end of the year, who do you think will end up in first place in the East Division in the Western Hockey League?
I know you might not agree with me, Chris, but I think the Lethbridge Hurricanes, they're as good as they come. I think they're obviously better than Saskatoon. I think they'll be better than the Medicine Hat Tigers. I think Medicine Hat has underperformed this year. The players that they picked up in the offseason haven't necessarily been their best players. I look at Matthew Ward and Ryder Ritchie, who were expected to be, big-time players for them this season. Maybe Gavin McKenna turns it up another touch in the second half of the season, so that remains to be seen. Calgary's a good team as well. I wouldn't be surprised if Calgary could get first, but I'd be surprised if the Lethbridge Hurricanes go on a massive run in the second half and take first seed in the Eastern Conference standings.
So the Lethbridge Hurricanes, to this point, according to Dante De Caria, they are underachievers. There is more potential there. This is like going to a parent-teacher interview when you were a kid, when they tell mom and dad to be like, well, there's potential. We're just not achieving it at the moment. All right, Dante, enjoy. Then until that Western Hockey League trade deadline passes, I know you'll be by the phone doing your thing. Enjoy and have a great call on Friday night when the Pats are in Moose Jaw to take on the Warriors. And we will have that game 6:20 CKRM with the pregame show starting at 6:30. We'll do the face-off at 7 o'clock. All right, time for a break. When we come back, a former Saskatchewan Rough Rider coach is joining a Super Bowl winning coach's staff. Have you ever played fantasy football and won or lost and had to pay the price? And what about billionaire accountability? When you're a billionaire, you don't owe anybody any explanation, right? Somebody actually did. We'll do that next. It's the all-new SportsCage on 620 CKRM, and we're streaming. You can watch what we're doing on X and at sportscage.com.